To introduce your next speaker. So that is Tanya Bowes, who's the Director of Corporate Affairs at CSIRO, or CSIRO for those of you that are in the know. Tanya is the Director of Corporate Affairs at CSIRO, Australia's national science agency, where she leads the function responsible for communications, strategy, stakeholder engagement, government relations, media relations, reputation and brand, marketing and digital and internal comms. With over 20 years' experience, Tanya's skills spans a wide range of communications and corporate affairs disciplines, and her career has seen her work with organisations in both the private and the public sector, having led communications in Australia as well as across Japan, Asia Pacific, the UK and Europe. Welcome, Tanya.
We're all caffeinated up, ready to go for the next one. So nice to see you all, and yeah, it's always a bit exciting to be in real life with you. I haven't quite got over it, and I've got another set of notes here, but thank you. So it's lovely to be here, and thanks very much for the invitation. Now, let's see if I'll press the right button. That way? Does that work? Which one am I pressing? Right arrow, yes. Thank you. So I would also like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the lands on which we're gathered on, this is a shot of a beautiful foggy Canberra morning. For those of you who fly into Canberra frequently, the fog can be the bane of your life when you're trying to get the flights in, but also makes for a beautiful backdrop. So the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, who are our First Nations custodians of this gorgeous land, and also our nation's first scientists. So pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So before I get into the topic around targeting audiences and why we do that and kind of some of the tactics that we've used around targeting audiences, I'd like to start with just a little bit of information about the CSIRO, because as my own surveys show, a lot of people know the CSIRO, but they don't really kind of know that we do something sciencey, but beyond that, not a lot else. So a quick snapshot. So we're one of the largest multidisciplinary research organisations in the world. And in fact, we're very lucky because a lot of countries have, what would we call it? Chopped up. Chopped up's probably the nicest word, some of their science agencies into smaller agencies. But Australia has kept ours together, and it means that CSIRO can deliver science across multiple disciplines of areas. So climate change, data science, social science, human health, animal health, biodiversity, Indigenous science, AI, data security, pretty much everything that you can think about, there is a scientist working in Australia on that issue. And there's about 5,000 people who are dedicated to doing that. We also have some pretty exciting big kit that our scientists work on, which means that from a content perspective, we have a lot of interesting things to point to and some great stories. So the dish at Parkes, the Honeysuckle Creek, which is not far from here, they beam those first pictures of man on the moon. We've got the research vessel, the Investigator, which goes off on big Antarctic voyages, and then right down to very tiny collections of insects and birds and all of those great things for us to study our biodiversity. So it's Australia's assets, and it's something that the CSIRO manages on behalf of the nation. Impact from science is really critical for us to measure, and in terms of your taxpayers' dollar, which ultimately you all fund the CSIRO, we return about $5 to 1 that you invest. So I hope you think we're pretty good bang for the buck. Some of the topics that we're going to cover today about why targeting can help you not only reach your audience but overcome some of that fatigue is just covered up here. So we're going to talk about why it matters, what are some of the data sources that you can draw on, how content itself can be a really powerful targeting tool, and then content fatigue, that kind of mood killer, and how we can overcome that. And I'm sharing some insights from the CSIRO's own experience, and hopefully you will find that useful. So let's start. Why do we target in the first place? Are there any Harry Styles fans here today on a really random chat? I know you all are, come on. So let's start with Harry Styles. This is kind of what your audience feels like every day. This maybe not the joyful face. I'm not sure if he's joyful or terrified, or there's probably a scream coming out from there. But this overwhelming sense of everything coming at you, this incredibly crowded space and incredibly noisy, and it's not really surprising. So there's a fantastic piece of research from We Are Social and Hootsuite that dives into some of our digital habits, and this is kind of one of the reasons why content fatigue and reaching our audiences is so hard to do. Like, what are we all doing? We're spending over 6 hours connected to the internet, almost 2 hours on your social media, and in terms of being exposed to ads, between 6,000 and 10,000 what we might call ads a day, so messages per day. So it's incredibly hard to reach your audience at the right time and to make sure they're ready to receive your message. And that's really, going back to Harry Styles, this is what we would like our relationship to be. Personal, and something where we feel a connection, where we can easily communicate a message. Because ultimately that's what targeting is all about. It's not so much about hitting those people for no reason. You're trying to build a connection and a relationship with our audiences over the long term, because it's really important for us to do that so that they're always with us throughout our journey. So let's just talk about, firstly, why we target, and something to consider when you're thinking about your own audiences. So I think we've already talked about the whys, and we'll keep coming back to whys today in our communications topics, but it's really important to step back, because sometimes we don't think about that. Someone will say, hey, I've got this great story, I've got this announcement, I've got this piece of information that we need to put out. Can you get it out for me? Can you get me in the Australian? Can you get this on the front page of, the Fin Review? Can you get this out to our employees? But it's stepping back and saying, what do we want them to do? Why are we doing that? What are we wanting to drive? What's the behaviour we're trying to change? If you're a commercial organisation, you might be wanting to sell something. You might be wanting to just shore up support for what you do. As public servants and as working in public organisations, we're funded by the taxpayer. And so their support is really important. But how can they generate support if they don't really know what we do? So it's really about starting on why you're targeting your audiences, and then moving on to how you're going to select them. I was thinking about, I can't get this terminology out of my mind, which is there are loads of ways to skin a cat, and then I was thinking, where on earth did that horrific term come from? But anyway, apparently there is, and I haven't got a better one, so we'll skin the cat. There's a number of ways that we can look at how you target. There's the obvious ones around your broad stakeholder groups, and they're just big amorphous buckets of people, of us. We will be in multiple target groups from multiple organisations, but we can get more granular. So from a demographic perspective, we can break down in terms of cultural background and age and status and income, and all of that starts to get us more targeted. And the more targeted we are, the more likely it is that we're going to have a message that resonates with someone, that someone's going to be interested in, and that they're going to do something about. And so our money and our effort and our time won't have been wasted. I love these last two because we've been running some campaigns recently based on interests. So we're running a campaign called Impossible Without. We want to get about 200 new PhD students to join the CSIRO. And so we're showing through storytelling that inventions like Wi-Fi, like plastic banknotes, like extendable wear contact lenses would have been impossible without the people behind them to give them a face. And so we're targeting those. We could say, well, we want to reach a demographic of, they're going to be between 18 and 32. They're going to be in these certain locations. We could do that. But we're actually targeting them through their interests and what makes them tick. And when they're following something, what else they might be following, so that we can try and really extend the reach of our campaigns. And then life stages is another great way of targeting people. Thinking about your content in relevance to what someone might be going through in their life. And, that time when you pick something up and you think, wow, I was just thinking about that. Maybe your microphone was turned on and someone was listening and you got served something up. But it also is really clever targeting, and the result of that, someone really thinking about who their audience is. CSIRO has not always done this terribly well. I think as a taxpayer-funded organisation, we serve everyone. And it was, who's this targeted to? Who's this piece of content or this news targeted to? It was everyone. Everyone needs to know about this. Actually, no, everyone doesn't, and probably by thinking about everyone, will probably reach no one terribly effectively. So about 3 years ago, we embarked on a very scientific approach to target our audiences. And so we worked with a social agency with their expertise in this area, and we came up with 5 personas that really helped encompass who the audiences are that we're trying to reach, because it is true, we do need to reach everybody, but just not everyone at the same time, through the same channel, with the same message. And so this has really helped provide a framework to guide our thinking and our decision-making about the way that we create content. It's a heavy digital skew because that's where you can target the best and you can reach your audiences the most effectively. But it's also conversation and narrative that's now reached our communicators at the CSIRO, who represent all of those brilliant areas of science, to be able to have conversations with their organisation about the type of person that we're trying to contact with that content. So it's been really, really helpful for us. Let's move on to the what you'll target them with. So if we know why and we know who, then we move on to what. So I kind of think of it of combining some of the information that you know already. So you've gone and decided the couple of things, it's probably going to be a couple of things that you're wise, and you'll be combining a couple of things around the targeting tools and the data that you're combining. And then, shamelessly stolen from McDonald's because I love a Big Mac, you add your special sauce, which is really your purpose. You know, there's something so compelling when people see content that's authentic and that speaks to who you are. And I think the more that you can define what your purpose is, not just as the words, but as a feeling and as a sense of something happening, the more powerful it can be and the more you're likely for your audiences to take notice of them. CSIRO has a very simple purpose, solving our greatest challenges, and I'd probably knock off those words, but everyone wanted, through innovative science and technology. But it's really, the organisation was created in 1916 to solve problems, to solve Australia's problems. There was a call that said we've got this invasive weed called prickly pear that's ruining Australia's agriculture land, and we don't know how to stop it. And so the CSIRO was called by the Prime Minister to say, can you go and sort that out? And ever since then, every piece of research that is delivered in CSIRO is pointed towards that purpose. And it's really compelling. It's kind of a bit like the janitor story, which apparently is not true, where Kennedy goes up to the janitor and he says, what's your job? And he said, my job is to put a man on the moon. You know, when you talk to people, whether they're in accounts or in communications, they're solving these problems. And that's what they're focused on. So there's the compelling vision. From a content perspective, why we do what we do is again, we try and boil it down really simply. When you talk to a scientist, they might not necessarily see. That's why we're sharing. This morning we shared a new megatrends report, which is, what are the big trends that we need to look out for over the next decade. It's really simple. We need to share the science. The scientist's job is not done when they publish a paper. It has to be communicated to people. The science has to be translated into a solution, into a real solution, something that you can put into your hands where the science has made a difference. And then we need to inspire the next generation of STEM professionals, get people to start taking up that career and to capture their interest and excitement around science. And so that's really a clear remit for us when we're thinking about creating content or reaching audiences. We've got a very clear purpose. We're solving challenges. If you're creating a piece of content that doesn't talk to the challenge that we have in the nation, then it's not going to be going anywhere. And then we've got this very clear why. Lots of data to be able to draw on, and you might not think it, but you'll be sitting on a mine of it. You're probably using a lot of it already. I'll just share some of the key pieces of data that CSIRO uses as well. So your audience data, it's a great place to start. You've got all these wells of data everywhere. You just need to delve into them. Content observations, time of day, when you post things. This is really important for us when we're thinking about posting on contentious issues, and I'm talking about social media particularly. Climate change, COVID. We don't post late at night. We don't post probably after about 5 p.m. on those topics because the channels can get feral, and I don't want the comms team or the community managers to have a rough night's sleep. So we think about the timing for content, and we think about when those audience types are accessing our data and sharing information. We look at, obviously, topics that people love, content types and time spent on sites. But we have to really carefully balance content that people love. They love furry animals. I used to work for tourism in a previous role, and whenever you post things like koalas, and everyone would go mad and let's just post loads of koalas. No, we can't do that because actually we do a lot more than just the biodiversity. So it's really important that we kind of delve into some of that data, and actually you find quite a lot of surprising information about how content works. Media, I think the media still has a really powerful role to play in disseminating our information. We look at things like syndication rates. That tells us whether a story was really worth publishing, if it's going to get really picked up and syndicated across news titles. We look at pitch success rates, how it's not just about the person pitching the story, but what's the content like? And did they have enough? And were they pitching at the right time? It's just all good data that we share back with our communications team, and they have forums to do that. iCensure's here today. You might want to go and have a talk to them. We've just switched to using their media impact score, which measures the quality and sentiment of coverage. So we can say we've got really great coverage, it's all very positive, but we have now got an industry benchmarking tool that we can use. For employee communications, we have a Yammer channel, so we can look at engagement through that channel. We are still at the early stages of trying to drive engagement around that because, as we know, we're all faced with so much information and channels to get to. But we look at things like open rates, shares, likes, all of the kind of typical data points that you would point to an external audience. The other great piece of data is your engagement survey. So many organisations will run an employee engagement survey. We snuck in a question with our people function about how our people feel about the information that they receive from us. And do they actually follow our social channels, and do they feel proud when they see our content? And that's really great, rich information for us to know that actually a lot of the time when we're posting on our external channels, we're talking to our people. And we're engendering that sense of pride and excitement in the work that they also deliver. And then ask your channels. You can run small focus groups, you can run surveys, you can get a few people in a room, but do ask. CSIRO's run a community survey. We've run a survey for the last 10 years, so we've got some really rich data to be able to draw on. And so every year we go out to a business in a community audience, which is largely representative of the Australian population and the targets that we're trying to reach through our outreach programs. And we ask them what they think of us. We ask them about awareness, we ask them about their perceptions, and we ask them about the topics that are important to them. What's important to you that we should be working on? What are the things that you really want, you are really interested in finding out? And we ask them what they care about. So there's just a snapshot there. So not surprisingly, nutrition and food is still a really big topic. So a lot of people know us for the total wellbeing diet. That kind of information around health is still really important for people, but they want to see how we're helping solve things like climate change and our biodiversity challenges, and they want to know about our people. They actually want to see the people behind the label of scientists, because we all still have this image of people in white coats, in labs with crazy hair. Actually, it's an incredibly diverse field, and so they want to see that too. So we use that information. We also deep dive into some areas like trust. So this year, Roy Morgan runs this survey for us, so they do that independently. And we have spent a lot of time trying to understand what drives trust in our audiences. So what do they really care about? Because that trust currency is incredibly important for CSIRO. In fact, it's the main thing that we trade off when we're working on, you know, areas of science that people might find a bit scary. When we're working on Ebola or COVID, foot and mouth, data, AI, you know, people are a bit scared about that sort of thing. We want them to know that the people who should be working on that is your National Science Agency, because you can trust us over the last 100 years to have dealt with those issues really carefully. And then you may know this, but for others who are running kind of external campaigns or paid campaigns, Google and Facebook have mountains and mountains and mountains of ways for you to target. And particularly I like for Facebook this thread or breadcrumb that they can spill around what your audiences are interested in and other things that they might be interested in, so that you can pick up some of their flow around targeting them. Okay, let's move on to mood killers, content fatigue. It's yeah, and so I know I was caught up in some doom scrolling last night and thinking, oh my God, this is so ironic that I've been here for about half an hour. I can't remember what I've looked at. Wasn't very good. I've stayed for about 2 seconds on each of those pages. And I was like, it's very pertinent. Anyway, so the first thing we do is defining what's the content all about. Being really clear on what it is and what it isn't, and aligning it to your strategy. So we have a pretty clear corporate affairs strategy. It cascades down from that purpose, those of being able to solve the greatest challenges. And so it's pretty clear what we need to deliver. And the data from our audiences tells us we need to always be focusing on the evidence base. So we never have anyone saying, I think, I believe, I really like, you know, none of that language. That's, you know, it is the science domain. Although I did actually open our Megatrends report, and our scientists have snuck in a quote from Yoda in right at the very back. And I was like, I texted them saying, how did that? Anyway, interesting. So we've also got to have a bit of personality. So that last point around, you know, injecting a bit of that personality and humour and a way for our audiences to engage with us. Tone of voice. So when we set our audience types, we also spent a lot of time talking about tone of voice. So important for targeting our audiences and for being able to get content that's going to cut through. And it's really hard to do. So with our science, and we didn't always get it right, you know, we wanted to have this sort of playful tone, but you know, a lot of the time you're talking about scientists who are delivering their life's work. They're publishing a paper after studying something for 4 decades. You know, they don't want to see a meme or a pun or you know, a top 10 tips for the media. They want to see their science treated sensibly. And so what we do when we're looking at the audiences that we're reaching in the piece of content is we pick a couple of those traits that we want to amplify. And there are some content that allows us to really amplify some, and others where we might kind of focus on high quality and informed. But essentially we look at that content and we get a sense for what's going to work best for our audiences. But no wonder we're all feeling overwhelmed. You know, when you look at the news agenda that's running, it's exhausting. Even just putting that slide together was exhausting, quite frankly. It's emotionally draining. We're invested in those topics. We hear about them non-stop. And, you know, some are silly and some are not, but it is an incredibly hard thing for us to cut through as communicators, to know how and what and when to communicate to get our message heard. So, interestingly, I looked into some of those stats around not so much what drives fatigue, but how people react to it differently. And we've really seen this in bushfires and with COVID. You know, it's anxiety-inducing. And particularly when we're thinking about content cut through, we look for the news hooks, right? We say, oh, there's that great story running. And in fact, our social team meets every day and scours all of the trends, and they come back and they talk about trends that they've seen either in social or in through the media. Our media and parliamentary liaison teams do the same thing, so that we're really on top of the news agenda every morning. So we all have calls at 8:45 and we get together. But there's a temptation to jump on the back of the news hook because everyone's talking about that. But just knowing that actually for our Gen Z generation and our Gen Y, that it's incredibly anxiety inducing, and they're turning off watching the news and finding out about things like that. They just don't want to know. And so adapting communication to be able to take that into account is really important. Then you layer over Edelman's lovely trust barometer. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But the trust bubble really burst last year. We saw this kind of increase when we all turned to the government to say, what will we do about COVID? And we thought, it sounds pretty good, actually. Yeah, we'll do that. And then the bubble burst once kind of reality set in and we were living with COVID for a bit longer and we had, a few other activities going on. So we are all representing in one shape or form government. So we've got a little bit more of a hurdle to pass with getting our content seen and getting it sticking. I think there's also a really important point around what builds trust. So the audience are telling us, well, what builds trust is information quality. If I can trust the quality of the information that you're putting out, then that will make me trust you more and then your content will resonate more. Australia's got one of the, I think 73% we believe is all fake news. And we believe that our government and media are actively putting out information that will be divisive to the national agenda. So I'm sorry to bring a downer. It can't all be about wombats. There is the reality that we're fighting quite a hard battle when we're putting out information. So we've got to use all of those tools and all of that technique and information to try and overcome it. Creating plenty of variety is one of those ways. And I think we're quite fortunate in not everyone has a lot of great kit and very diverse areas to talk about, but try and find the diversity in everything that you're doing. Try and look for those really brilliant moments of interest. Blogs, expert commentaries, big pictures, videos, reels, all those things. We use all of those tools every day. It's not running on a big budget, it's running on people, so we don't outsource anything. We do most of that in-house. And we focus really heavily on the assets that we can get from the field. So actually a lot of our scientists are out there taking pictures and sending them in and putting them on our central database so we can use those. And they often get things that, A, we probably wouldn't want to take pictures of, and B, that they've got access to. So we really draw on those. So all the topics, looking at things like your assets and your imagery. Just a word on style guidelines, which I was going to say I'm glad the head of brand, I kind of own brand, but I'm glad that they won't be listening to this, because I think sometimes the style guide is incredibly constraining, and when we're looking at creating content, it can all feel a bit samey. Sorry, Telstra. So I thought, I wonder who might have samey content. And I went and looked at Telstra's Instagram feed, and they've clearly got a very nice structure and asset that they can use to communicate information, but it all starts looking a bit like wallpaper, and it all fades into one, and you don't really get a lot of traction. There's some of those that absolutely warrant a clear visual presentation, like flood recovery. You probably don't want a lot of bells and whistles around that. You want the information. But their little circle there, things I can't answer, unknown numbers, and why I wave goodbye on video calls. I mean, that should be quite a funny moment, but it's been, drawn into boredom by the style guide. So it's just really looking at that. Sit and scroll through your feeds and see if your imagery is actually working against you. The unboxing video, which I did watch half of, and then I stopped because I realised I was watching an unboxing video of the guy unboxing the modem, had like 520 comments. So you'd be looking at that as your data source and saying, wow, there's some really great audience engagement there. Can we get more of that? How do we replicate that? And what can we do? Our team spend a lot of time. They obviously spend a lot of time on telly and on social media. But we lean very heavily on pop culture references. I know I'm old because I had to ask the social team what these things were. And then I asked my 13-year-old, she's like, oh, Mum. So the first one is, what is it? There are 10 but they don't know what our acronym stands for. So that's he's a 10, but he wears socks with his sandals. That's a TikTok trend. And then would you love me if I was still a worm is another TikTok trend. You're all looking horrified, like, what? But it does drive very interesting audience engagement. One of the pieces of data that we have is that awareness for 18 to 24-year-olds is really low. It's really hard audience to reach. Conversely, actually, the age group just below that, the 14 to 17-year-olds, has got really high engagement and interest. But there's something that happens, probably life, to 18 to 24-year-olds where they just completely lose interest in us and our science. And so content's a great way to do that. We have lots of opportunities. Beyonce, this is our Beyonce fly. So being able to use pop culture to gravitate towards an audience and to give them something that's really interesting. And then we can serve up some other really sensible content around that to bring them into another topic. Fatigue sets in when you don't know when to change direction. Bushfires was a great example. 2019, bushfires hit. And we all quickly realised that actually our editorial content calendar, which includes media and internal, really needed to be on nothing other than bushfires. And over that time, we posted about 330 pieces of content. COVID, we've done about 1,000. But there comes a point when your audience tells you that they've had enough or that they want to change direction. For CSIRO, it was really important that we brought our kind of special sauce into the dialogue. If any of you follow us, we have Wombat Wednesday every Wednesday. God, the team has to watch out if they don't post on time because there's like, where's the wombat? But they were in a genuine dilemma. You know, those animals dying, those heartbreaking scenes of koalas screaming and being rescued. And they just said, we don't really feel like we can do a wombat post. And so we talked about it and said, well, let's pivot. Let's use it as the opportunity to talk about the awful and devastating things that have happened and find the right image and find the right message. And so that was moved into talking about Wildlife Wednesday. They also love debunking, which is one of the things they do, debunking the myths around wombats, letting other, come into my house. You're more than welcome. Actually, wombats really hate sharing their houses. So they were able to debunk those myths. But that's really important for that audience fatigue, trust, cut through, is to know when to intervene and have some really powerful content to share. And then finally, just we treat some of our content like scientists. We always hear about the great stuff that happens at the end of science, the Wi-Fi, the invention. But actually, there's a ton of failure that happens along the way. And content journeys are just like that. The fatigue moments, the audience targeting, it should be a lot of test and learn, which is how the scientists approach it. So that's how our teams approach the way that they reach their audiences. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an idea on how the CSIRO thinks about reaching our audiences so that we can get really good cut through, so that we can build awareness and engagement. We really want to build affinity and love with the public. So we do that through some of those techniques that I've talked about here today. And happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tanya. Mary's going to come out there with a microphone for you.
Yeah.
No, wait, no. The people at home can't hear you.
Watching, so we'd love for them to hear
now
you.
Because it's quite a flippant comment, question. Does Gary in HR really exist? And I'd love to see the analytics around that post.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. So one of our gorgeous social team members went and got another job. How dare they? But one of their last final hurrahs was they posted they created this new persona, Gary from HR. So they had a lot of fun with that. Go and have a look at our Gary from HR, and it got picked up by Pedestrian TV as a kind of, it's a job ad. We need a new social media advisor. But she masqueraded as Gary. So Gary doesn't exist. I'm sure Gary does exist somewhere in our organisation. There's probably a lot of Garys in our organisation. But yes, Gary from HR is minding our social channels while we try and find a replacement for the lovely Georgia. Good. Thank you.
Time for one question. Great, just over here,
You're not
Mary.
going to ask about the wombat?
We don't have a store of wombats that we wheeled out for photo ops.
Do you have any tips for getting the tone of voice and getting the pop cultural references right when your audience is very different to the people who are making the posts? I have a very young, very enthusiastic younger millennial woman running my social media, and most of my audience is irrigators who are, 60 up men.
Love that. Yeah, and I have to say we don't always get it right, and the team doesn't like it when I'm sitting at night scrolling through our own Facebook. There's a few that I've had to ask to be taken down because we didn't quite get the tone right. I think it's about spending time with the audience. Expose them to who the audience is so that they can get a better sense for who those people are. Because you're right, you can use all those pop culture references, but they go down like a lead balloon if you don't get them right. The TikTok one's a great example. I kind of go, I don't understand any of this. What do they mean? And then they politely tell me that I'm not the target audience, which I know that's code for you're far too old. But it's just about spending time, expose them to some of your audiences, get them to sit down in a room and understand kind of what makes them tick. Because there will be pop culture references that will appeal to those people. As Star Wars, when they do the Star Wars posts. They reach quite a wide demographic, but also really interesting, a much older demographic for us. So it's just kind of understanding the audience is a good thing.